Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So why do so many change initiatives fail to achieve their outcomes? Everywhere you look, you see transformation programs being launched with big mandates to deliver fundamental change. But many of these expensive, resource-consuming programs will not succeed because they're too focused on the process of change rather than challenging the way leaders in their organizations think and behave in order to create lasting change. One man who's dedicated over 10 years of research to the pursuit of understanding this is the accomplished Dr. Ronald Skea. Dr. Ron is the author of the book Leadership, Organizational Change and Sense Making. It's actually been called the Heretic's Handbook. Is that right? Because it challenges the modernistic way of thinking. His PhD in 2017 looked at when realities collide, and that's the sense making that can promote and inhibit change of leadership mindsets. Now, Ron is not just an academic and a published author. He's first and foremost a leading practitioner in his field, working for globally renowned organizations. He's currently systems thinking lead consultant at Allianz Insurance and has worked for organizations such as Lloyd's Banking Group and has been global systems thinking consultant at Aviva. He's also had a variety of roles in different sectors, including Velux, Vanguard Scotland, Stockport Council, and Dundee City Council, as well as consultancy roles too. He's got a really wide range of speciality skills, including systems thinking, Kanban, Scrum, Scaled Agile, operations management, strategic HR, to say a few. And he's also been a visiting lecturer at University of Dundee and University of St Andrews as well. Dr. Ron, we're really glad to have you join us today. Thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon.
So to kick us off, just tell us a bit about the work you do. What does your role involve?
Currently, as you just said, I'm lead systems thinking consultant in Allianz. And so my role is leadership coach, using postmodern approach to leading and organizing, or helping leaders to think differently about leading and organizing. You started off by saying, why do so many change initiatives fail? Which is quite interesting, because there is this research, and you've got the two different sources. One says 75%, one says 90% fail. But actually, that's only part of the story. What they say is they fail to deliver their expected outcomes. They all deliver something. It's just not what was expected, and not often what was considered desirable. You can even expect outcomes. What would surprise me is not that 90% failed to deliver their expected outcomes, but rather that 10% did, because in a postmodern perspective, as soon as you set some expected outcome, the environment that we operate in is going to change. I didn't even have to know if today's meeting was going to take place because we have a global outage caused by a bad update. Things constantly happen, the flux of the environment. So setting objectives is a difficult task. It's the old thing about predicting the future. It's a very difficult thing to do. So what we do, or what my role is as a coach, is to help leaders take a different perspective. Exactly as you said, focus on their thinking about how to lead, organize, rather than how to deliver specific outcomes. My role, therefore, as I say, as a leadership coach, I don't do anything in terms of change. The one thing that bugs me about change is the concept of it. The modernist concept of change is a noun, a thing that somebody can do, which just isn't the case. Change is just running a business. That is change. So the idea that I rock up and do change to someone just doesn't work. My role is to help challenge thinking, and then leaders use their new thinking to deliver their business in a different way often.
And that can be quite a different way of looking at the world and operating for the leaders you're working with, I guess. So how do they respond to that initially?
This is not something that you can teach through a rational presentation. You mentioned heresy, and that's what it is, because you're challenging lots and lots of the fundamental beliefs about how to manage and run organizations. Me turning up saying, the Earth's flat, it's not round at all. They're not going to believe that. So my approach is to help leaders get immersed in reflexive practice, what we call in systems thinking normative experience, whereby we get into the work and we study their conceptions of how things currently work. We then go in and say, well, let's just test that and let's have a look. So we do, and then quite often, of course, what we find is that what's happening isn't what was expected. And that's what allows us to then reflect and discuss why that might be. So we use a model of 5 different types of reflective practice, which allows leaders to study their current systems, but the outcome of it is the thinking. What is it about how we think just now about how we should design and run the organisation? What impact is that having? And so initially, it's quite challenging because they're used to the modernist approach. So first 2 questions that a leader will ask me is, how long will this take? Because change is a project with a defined start and finish date. And secondly, what exactly will it deliver? I'm going in to help them with their thinking. I don't do change. So the answer to both the questions is I have no idea. I don't know how long it will take, because it's going to take forever. You're always going to be using this methodology. And we don't know what we're going to be able to do until we've studied and understood the current system and the restraints that we've designed into it. But once they get through the reflexive practice experience, it becomes much easier. You say, oh yeah, I can see now some of the stuff that I thought you were on cloud cuckoo land. I can see some of this actually makes sense now. So getting their engagement and maintaining it until we hit the point where they start to see there is something in this methodology is the most difficult bit.
You mentioned 2 terms there, modernist and postmodern thinking as well. So just for the benefit of definition, where are the roots of those 2 different types of thinking? What might be examples of them in a workplace?
Well, as with leadership, there's as many definitions as there are writers on the topic. So my definition of modernism and postmodernism is usually people talk about Adam Smith and from then on in the development of management thinking. But actually, you've got to go back to 2000 BC if you want to understand where modernist thinking comes from, because it all stemmed from 2 debates that were taking place at the same time, but independently, Greece and in ancient China. So in Greece, you had Parmenides, whose view was that reality is fixed. It's external to us, and it's fixed, and it's permanent. And so in many ways, there's no such thing as change. There's problems that you get that's where you get the stasis model, and change seen as an interruption to normality. Whereas Heraclitus is arguing there's no such thing as change, there's just a constant flux in the environment, and we create the problems that we think exist. They're not real, they're not out there. So I use the example of current thinking around budgets. I've worked in 3 different companies in 3 different countries. So you think, well, we would all have the same reality. We're all commercial companies operating in a capitalist environment. If you're in the UK, the company I was working in the UK, the crucial dates, important dates, big problem dates when all hell breaks loose was sort of end of the financial year and quarterly. The end of the financial year in this company was December, end of December. So you can imagine at the end of the year, it's a really important date. Everybody's focused on that problem. And then March and so on. I worked in another company where the financial year ran from April. In one company, everybody's focused on this reality of December being the key day where you've got to get everything done for the end of the year. And another company said, well, no, it's not really all that important. We've got till April. That's the important date. And then I was operations director for a Danish company that worked on trimesters. So instead of quarters, they were working on every 4 months. So they were working on days like a date in May. This was the important day. Everything has to be fixed. And that's just another day for the other 2 companies. So the point is we create what's important. We create the reality that we operate in. We've gone with a philosophy of change and leadership, not as activities, but as things. And so you have leaders and you have change, projects, etc. In the postmodern thing, you have activities of leadership which don't reside in any individual. There's no leader, and I defy you to go into almost any organisation and find somebody whose job title is leader. Very, very few. I've seen chief this, there's head of that, etc., which is just capturing the fact that what we talk about as leaders are really just people who have been appointed to roles that have significant decision-making authority. But that's not leadership, that's just management. A leader is not somebody who drives change. A leader is somebody who works with others to help achieve change. And the final thing about postmodernism, and from the Chinese element and Taoism, which took the Clayton view, was a concept called Wu-wei, which is often translated literally as meaning no action or non-action. And this is what effective leaders do. It's not really right, because a leader that doesn't do anything isn't going to be very effective. What it really meant was unnoticed action. And so it's the concept of the most effective leaders are those who are almost unseen or unnoticed because they operate in the background. So from a systems thinking leadership challenge, when working with leaders, is saying, you do not personally deliver change and organizational outcomes. You may take the credit for it, but you don't deliver it. Teams deliver it. Your role as a leader is to enable your teams to deliver those outcomes. And therefore, you should be in the background, clearing the way to allow them to do that, acting on the problems that they come across or escalate to you. And that's all kind of mundane stuff, but that's what delivers your effective leadership results.
So you mentioned their systems thinking, and you've got systems thinking in your job title. Can you just tell us a bit more about systems thinking and your definition of that?
There's as many definitions of systems thinking. There's fields of different definitions of systems thinking. But for me, systems thinking is probably not even the right term. It should be thinking systems, would be a better description. It's about taking a holistic view of an organization and an external outside-in perspective. Just as we define problems, so we define systems, and we do not operate in closed systems, which we tend to think about our organizations as, and they're not. They operate in a much wider environment. There's never really a boundary. So in systems thinking, we take the customer perspective and we say, right, my first task with the leader is to challenge their purpose and the purpose of their system or their organization from their current perspective. And if I ask any leader for the purpose of their organization, it will generally be very internally focused, and it will be around delivering profits and shareholder value, etc. Now, you and I, as customers, to be honest, don't really care about those things. So what we say is, what's the purpose if I was a customer? So I currently work in insurance, and I would say, so what is the purpose of insurance from a customer's perspective? You taking money out and handing it over to me, why would you do it? And of course, I don't know about you, but I certainly don't like insurance. I would much rather not have to pay for it, but I do take it out because what I am buying is sort of peace of mind that if something goes wrong, it will be sorted out and I will get back to where I was beforehand, something like that. And he says, right, so if we do that, that allows us to then get into this reflective practice and say, well, now, if that's the purpose, from that customer's perspective, how well do you think we do against that? We may have lots and lots of measures about all our internal stuff, shareholder value and profit and efficiency. But how are we doing against doing what matters to the customer? Well, we don't know, because quite a lot of the time we don't measure these things. So let's get in there and let's start measuring it. And the reason we do that is, it was Deming, who was one of the fathers of systems thinking as we use it. He always used to say, does nobody give a hoot about profit? Because if you go in and look at the way systems are organized just now, they're usually hideously inefficient and expensive, he said. But if you focus on just doing what matters to the customer, just delivering value to your customer, that's where you get your shareholder value. That's where you get your profit. And so it's about turning around focus from saying, let's focus on shareholder value and profit and efficiency, to let's focus on doing what's right for the customer, knowing that an outcome of that and a benefit will be profit, efficiency, etc.
It sounds so simple, but so challenging, isn't it? Because you're shifting absolute paradigms here, aren't you? In so many different ways, whether it's like, you're surfacing beliefs in terms of how people believe, an ideology about how the organization should be managed and how we achieve things, to like where we actually focus our effort and who we're trying to please as well. How do you actually go about doing your work then and reaching out to people and challenging people's belief systems?
Well, it is challenging because, as I say, you're up against the current thinking. I defy you to find a leader that doesn't think that they are customer focused, that their organisation is not customer focused. And I'm not arguing that they're evil people who couldn't care less about customers. They genuinely believe that they are customer focused. So first important thing is not to go in to tell people they don't know how to run their business. So if I'm working with leaders, I'm working with people who are very successful, who have got very successful businesses. And so me rocking up saying, you know what, you don't know how to run your business isn't going to get me very far. So it's about acknowledging that there is success in what we're doing. And is there opportunity for greater success? And they say, well, yeah, but how? And I say, well, let's try taking a different lens. If you look at something through one lens and a different lens, you can see things slightly differently. And so I'm asking you to sign up to try something. Now, in sense making, that is, I did for my PhD, there's 9 different elements. And one of them is cognitive dissonance. And really what I'm trying to do when I initially engage with leaders is get something called commitment compliance. Now, in terms of cognitive dissonance, if I said, chief executive in one organization said to me, go in and do systems thinking to this area. They're a pain in the backside and I need them sorted out. Now I'm going to tell them that the leader, the chief officer in this area, that they will work with you and they must do what you say. Against my better judgment, I went along with that. And it was a complete and utter disaster because from a cognitive dissonance angle, what you had was somebody who was in forced compliance. They had to go along with what I was saying. So they went along with it. The chief executive said they must do it, but there was absolutely no commitment to it. Another element of sense making is that they were therefore able to rationalize anything that they were finding and what I was trying to get them to do in reflexive practice. So I remember another example where in one organization we had what was called the war room. We were in a desperate situation. We needed to get a radical rethink of the structure of the organization. So we got a team together and we collected masses and masses of information that just shows how bad and how inefficient and how unsuccessful the current setup was. Put it all up on a wall and then said, we're going to take the leaders in and show them this, and it will shock them into thinking this has got to change. It didn't. What it did was it absolutely reinforced their current thinking, and they rationalised it because it was too much of a shock. And they said, no. It was like us saying, you guys don't know how to run your business. And they rationalised it. And there's a number of different rationalisation techniques that you can use. Find one figure, one tiny little error in a data, in a million data points, and you say, right, therefore everything's suspect. I found one data error or whatever, or you blame other people. Yeah, that's right. You need to go and sort that lot out, not me. If you force people to do something, they're not going to change, or if they might change in the short term, but as soon as I walk away, or as soon as the chief executive's gaze, like Sauron, moves away to something else, they just go back to what they were doing. And that is one of the key failures in systems thinking, is if you haven't had the right commitment, you don't get the sustainability. And it just reverts back to old ways of thinking. So what you need to try and get is a combination of what's called forced compliance, in which case I'm trying to use my credibility, almost like in a laboratory situation, the white coat and the stethoscope, etc., saying, I want you to engage in this experiment with me. And okay, well, you are the expert here, and I will agree and go along with it. So as a consultant, I'm trying to build up enough of a relationship with leaders and credibility with leaders for them to say, you're credible, you're believable. I'm not convinced, but I'll go along with you and engage and do some study. And it's a fine line, because instead of forced compliance, they have agreed to cooperate with it. And so you can't rationalize it away as, well, I was forced to do it. You chose to engage with it. And then as they start to find stuff, it's less easy to rationalize it. It's a long-winded explanation, but that's the kind of tightrope you have to walk as a consultant.
You can already start to see how many change programs go wrong from the very beginning, isn't it? Just the way in which they communicate and, start to roll that change out as well, because often managers will look at a potential change and their belief system just doesn't match with it, does it? And they'll often believe that they're acting for the good of the organization by not going along with a new idea.
You've got to think about, back to the point you made about 70% of initiatives fail or whatever. I went to work with one director of finance. he said, okay, look, I am interested in this methodology. He said, because we've had 9 transformation in 10 years. He said, so good luck with you on this one. He said, it was commitment compliance. He said, I need something, so I am prepared to give you a chance. But let me tell you, my experience of 9 previous ones is it's not going to work.
Bryce, can I ask you a sidebar question? Because something that we're seeing a lot in organisations, there are a lot of head of transformations being appointed at the moment. Transformation seems to be a particular name for a program.
I've been one.
I would love to get your insights.
Well, it's one of my things, is that trying to get leaders to a position where they're taking a postmodern view of leadership and organisation. And in a postmodern view, change is not something that is a standalone function. And so the clearest sign that you have a modernist organisation is if it has a standalone change or transformation function. I was a head of transformation, and I still argued that wasn't the right thing to do. Because at the end of the day, I've also been an operations director. And in those instances, I wouldn't have accepted a transformation or a change function telling me how to run my business. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. Change, transformation, HR, and lots of other things should be in the business, not standalone functions, because they're there to help the business achieve its objectives. So yes, there's a lot of that going on. It's the wrong way to do change.
I'm starting to understand why it was called the Heretic's Handbook now. I think that's, Danny, as Ron just said, the most provocative thing since someone said, imagine a world without models.
Yes.
But that grounding as an operations director really does give you an enormous amount of insight in terms of how change actually works in an organisation, doesn't it?
Yes. And it's also important when I'm trying to work as a leadership coach, because it helps with credibility. Because the first question is, well, have you done this? Have you run an organisation? Do you know what it's like? You know, the pressures I'm under, etc. Well, yes, I do. I have done it, and I have results. So that helps.
What was your journey to your career now? You've had so many interesting things along the way, but what has got you to this particular point now where, you're an accomplished author and you're sort of leading the way in systems thinking?
I know, well, that all sounds kind of like there was some sort of grand plan. It was almost like I had a change project that got me to this point. And the reality is it just happened. I kind of drifted, if you like, to this point. I mean, I started off a long time ago, went to college to do business studies. Got engaged in the student union and student politics. This was in the 70s. We were putting on live music. Some of the big bands of today started off doing circuits like ours, and had a ball, but and got involved in student politics, and then failed my business studies. So left college with nothing. I then got a job as a clerical assistant in council. I mean, I was quite good at my job, but I also got engaged in the trade union movement. And those two things, the student politics and the trade union movement, I think kind of are what led me to where I am, in the sense of my beliefs. As a trade union leader, and I was very successful at it. It was a difficult job because it's not like a leader in an organisation where you are given authority and power. It's all referential power. You have to be representative of the people that you're representing, but you also have to try and take them along. And that was a fantastic leadership lesson, because I couldn't just say, do it or else or anything else. But it also led to a belief that all managers and leaders were basically incompetent, got in the way of our members doing a good job for the public, which is what they were there to do. However, I was quite a thorn in the side as a trade unionist, and this was back in the days when I had an industrial relations officer. I don't know if they still have that nowadays. And the industrial relations officer went off. So they asked me if I would jump the fence and become the industrial relations officer, so good from the trade union side. And much to the disgust of my union colleagues, I jumped the fence and poacher become gamekeeper. So that got me that's how I got into an HR department. Then went and did another qualification, a diploma. I did training in development, and then went on into the masters in HR. But I still had that same view that there was a problem with the way we led organisations and designed the organisations.
And what do organisations and unions get wrong? Because potentially it can work, but many times it doesn't work. Like, what are the ingredients of a successful kind of organisation trade union relationship, do you think?
Well, I always said, as a trade unionist, I always said to leaders, look, you get the trade union, you did that. I said, if you were a good leader, I wouldn't need to be doing anything. I'd almost be like insurances to our customers now. I'm only there as a safety net, and you wouldn't see much of me if you did a good job. So if you allowed people to do a good job, if you recognized them for doing a good job, and if you just focused on getting out of the road and letting them do it, but no, you insist on trying to micromanage them and getting away, set up rules, etc. I'm still a strong believer in trade unions because they are absolutely there to defend things that need to be defended. But my argument still exists that they're only as active as you make them from a leadership perspective. So I couldn't really articulate particularly what it was. I just knew that there was a problem about the way we approached the design and running of organizations. And that was when, just as part of my own development and interest, I got involved in the Deming network and met a lot of systems thinkers. Came across John Seddon and Vanguard, who it was quite interesting because there was a Deming forum and people were saying, well, this is a very difficult thing and really we will never understand systems, because get into the systems world, you can get people say you'll never be able to understand a system. And John Seddon said, he was doing a presentation, he said, well, that's all fine and well. He said, but I'm working with leaders who are saying to me, yeah, great, but what do I do differently on Monday morning? Because, I haven't got 20 years to learn about systems thinking. So he was very active in developing a systems thinking model that I still use today. So that triggered my interest and allowed me to start kind of articulating, rather than just saying managers are hopeless. I think the Deming thing is, he talks about 85-15%. He said 85% of the performance that you get out of the system comes from how you have designed the system. Only 15% is a people issue. And yet we've got HR departments and people management that try to manage 100% of the people. And he was making the point, well, just focus on the 15 that are a problem and let the 85% get on with it. And I think that was the same with leaders as well. They weren't all incompetent. That was a wrong perspective that I had. 85% of them were a result of the system, leading in the system, because they are a product of the system as well. All leaders, even the chief executive, are a product of a system. 15% of them are numpties and need sorted out. That was what got me interested. I moved out of the industrial relations side into organisational development and started using the systems thinking methodology. I worked alongside consultants from Vanguard to help me learn how to use the methodology with leaders. We delivered some stonking results and that got attention. It's always good when you can get evidence that a new type of thinking can deliver results. So that gets curiosity. So we had more results. That led to me being approached and moving into the private sector, being the operations director for Velux, which is a company that has for a long time been using systems thinking, delivering outstanding customer service. And guess what? Outstanding financial results as well, because they got the concept right. So I was brought in because of my systems thinking, which was quite an interesting example. Because having 20 years in local government to then become an operations director in a world-leading window manufacturer, there's a lot of people saying, "What were they thinking?" It's a strange appointment, but I wasn't there because of my technical knowledge. And this is the thing, we often promote leaders because of their technical expertise in an area, when actually that's not what's needed. What's needed is their leadership expertise. And in my case, it was systems thinking leadership. Approach to join various other organizations. Aviva had set up a wee global team of coaches to go around their different operating enterprises. So I had a couple of years in Singapore and then a couple of years in Canada working there, which was at the same time as the university where I was teaching at St Andrews. It's the head of the business school said, "This stuff's really interesting that you do. I don't get it. I don't know what it is. But have you thought about doing a PhD into it?" And that's what I drifted into that as well. I hadn't thought it's just something that I want to do. I ended up doing it, and I never forgave him. 10 years of pain and agony, but I did my PhD. It was really interesting because that allowed me to think about and do my own reflexive practice on what I was doing as a participant observer. So I was trying to influence leaders, but I was trying to understand what my role in that was and what I was seeing in their sense making. So that's how I did my PhD. And the really interesting thing for me was that working in Europe, Singapore, North America, organizational culture trumps the local culture. Local culture has its impact, but boy, the organizational culture, the modernist thinking, it was the same in all of these places. The same thinking, the same structure, the same problems, and the same challenges.
I had a question about the organisations you've worked for, so like Aviva and Allianz, who've invited you in to work in a systems thinking kind of way in Velux. Where does that come from in that organisation? Is it in a particular individual? Is it something about the way the organisation is set up that means they're kind of open to working in that way?
Well, it's a good question, but I mean, I joined these organisations because they were already on a systems thinking journey and they wanted some expertise to help as the interest in that grew. So both in Aviva, Allianz and Lloyd's, they had already gone on that journey. So I know always starts with somebody has an interest and pulls on someone. I'm not sure who it was, but that happened in each of these organisations. Again, similarly, they produce results that then generates more interest. And that was why almost like the germ, is it Marius Tribus, we talked about germ theory of management, which is almost like you go in and you infect an area and hope that it spreads and spreads and spreads. So
these are great analogies, aren't they? Yeah, because I'm building on Danny's point, like, because these are enormous, complex global systems, aren't they? For a manager trying to effect change or whatever it is, there's so many different variables at play, aren't there? It's difficult to actually understand what will happen as a result. How do you even begin to think about all the different influences that may or may not get in the way of a change program?
I mean, it's spot on. The bigger the organisation, the more challenging it is. From a theoretical perspective, of course, what you would do is you say, well, you start at the top of the whole system. So you go in with Aviva, the chief executive, and you look at it across the globe and say, right, have we got this right as an organisation? Well, your chances of getting in any organisation that size and doing it is just zero. Maybe if you're one of the big four cons or something, and then you've got that kind of credibility, and you can get companies to hand out huge amounts of dosh for things that fail to deliver results. But for us, it's a case of getting the balance right again. You're going too small, then you're not going to produce something that's significant enough for people to say, yeah, that was about a new way of thinking and designing of the organisation. That was just an operational improvement. Okay? So if you just go for low-hanging fruit, it's not going to work. So you have to get leaders that have their arms around a big enough area of the system to demonstrate that, like, it's a business methodology and it's a way of thinking at a business level that then starts to get interest in other areas of the business. But if it's too low down or too small, then you'll not even be able to deliver the results, because if you're trying to deliver systemic improvement, but you're looking at this area of that side of a system, well, you're not going to be able to do it because all the problems are happening outside the area that you have defined as the system. It's not the system. And that's often the first discussion that we have to have. So if a leader says, right, I'd like to work with you, or you help me look at an area, and say, well, what are you looking at? And sometimes I have to say, it's too narrow. I'm not going to be able to help you because you're not going to be able to deliver the results. And so Aviva, Lloyd's, Allianz, they are not now 100% systems thinking organizations. Of course not. They're huge, but there's a lot of interest around systems thinking, and it is growing and it is developing. And
what do you enjoy most about your role? It sounds challenging, going into challenging places. You're guiding people. You're coming up against. What do you find most enjoyable?
It is seeing people develop and change their way of thinking. I mean, I think you're going to ask anyway about kind of what's a success measure, which is quite an interesting point. It's linked to this because what I'm not delivering change. I could say what I like is seeing the fantastic results that I deliver. Well, I don't deliver anything. The leaders and the teams that I work with, and this is really important because I can't coach a leader on their own to change a system. Because if leadership is about understanding that, in fact, most of the time you're not a leader, that it's your whole system. We have to work together with a whole team. And it's seeing them deliver things, and we've just done a retro in one area that I've been involved in. It was fantastic, just getting the feedback from the team about how liberated they felt, how they were much more effective, much more productive. They were able to do value work rather than all the nonsense that they were being involved in before. So just that enthusiasm, and to get that from the whole team and from the leaders saying, "Oh yeah, this is definitely much better." That's what I like to see. I like to claim that all the results they delivered were mine as well, but they're not.
And you mentioned retrospectives there, for example. It's means and ends as much as anything, but what are some of the approaches or tools that you really enjoy using? It's just something that you find really useful in different settings.
I do a guest presentation in systems thinking, another tool for change agents. And spoiler alert, the answer is no. It's not really tools, it's methodology and it's principles that we just ask people to adopt, and then they develop the methods and the tools that they use. Having said that, the systems thinking methodology is great, and it does have a simple model, which is study, experiment, then act. Again, sounds terrifically simple and obvious, but I challenge you to go into any business and ask frontline staff in that model, study, experiment, act. What is your experience of change? It's always act, because somebody just tells us that we're changing the way we do things. And that's the model, because why would you involve them in it? Whereas what we do is we start the study and we pull the whole team from across the system, a representative sample of people, top to bottom, left to right, horizontally, that have all the experience of the system, and we study it and we reflect on what we're learning. We pull out the system's conditions that leads to the thinking. That's why it gets uncomfortable for leaders, but they're engaged by this point anyway. And then it's safe change, because we say, right, okay, having done this, we can now focus on just doing the value steps. Let's experiment doing that. We have a hypothesis that if we just do these 5 steps instead of these 100, that we'll get better results for the customer and for the organization. Traditionally, of course, we'd say, right, that's it, roll it out across the whole organization. No, what we'll do is we'll feed some business through it. We'll set up a new business model, feed business through it, get the data, demonstrate that is workable and scalable, and then start to roll more people in so that they get the same normative experience. They understand the why we're changing things, not just do it differently. So I love it. I think it's a great, simple model, and it's really effective when you see that working. But there's lots of other ones as well. I think Kanban's a very effective tool and critical chain.
I'm just loving the words hypothesize, study, reflect. It's very
great. And of course, leaders are very busy people, so often they say, we've not got time to do all of that kind of stuff. So that's part of the debate you have to have is, okay, I'm happy to work with you, but sometimes a leader will say, right, it's great, I like the sound of that. Can you go and work with that team, please, and deliver it? You have to know the leader well enough, but I might joke with them and say, are you resigning? No, why are you saying that? Because you seem to be asking me to take on your role. You need to lead it. I haven't got time to do that. Yeah, you have to make a choice then. Have you got the time not to do it? There is a commitment that has to be made.
So is that the most challenging aspect of the work you do, or is there's something else that you find really challenging?
Initial setup is really important. What is it your expectations are of working with me? And we need to get that clear, because if it's delegate me to go and sort out a change, that's not going to work. Have you got the time to commit to do this, and have you got the will to do it as well? A big challenge is getting a team together, because although this is a safe methodology and it produces the results, it's the sort of the curve, whereas you've got a dip in performance because you take a team out and maybe for 6 weeks, they're not doing any work because they're studying the system. Performance dips. Then you start experimenting. Well, you've got to learn. You test the first one, we reflect on it, take the second one. So they start to get better and better. And then it shoots up in their product. The challenge is getting a team together, getting the time, maintaining their commitment as they're in this depressing slump, because after 5 weeks of study, they're like, oh my God, are we never going to finish this? And it's depressing. And one danger is that you can, at the end of the study period, just sit back and admire the problem. Well, look at that, sis. Imagine that. Who on earth is responsible for that? And that's not the purpose of this. The purpose is to say, let's admire the opportunities that we've got here. It's great. There's loads of things that we could be doing. Probably one of the biggest challenges is that if you are not working at an organisation-wide level of intervention, you will be up against the current systems conditions, which will be silos and functionalisation, the modernist concept of the organisation, which is increasing levels of order are needed to cope with the complexity of the environment out there. And it's confusing order with complexity. And so we end up with silos, functions, who can do what. And from a systems thinking perspective, we need to break that down. So it's always really challenging, because you get a team that's really enthusiastic and then they bump up against elsewhere in the system. Oh, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that.
Can I just pick up on, you just said, confusing order with complexity?
I always refer people to look up a video. Brian Cox did it on one of his, Professor Brian Cox, in one of his programs, and he uses the sandcastle analogy. He's talking about entropy and negentropy. The second law of thermodynamics is entropy. Everything will tend to less order. Now, that's not the same as atrophy. It's not about wasting away and dying. It's about just things will become less and less ordered. That's the nature of things. And it will become more and more complex. So if you think about, if you do an elaborate sandcastle on the beach, very highly ordered, there's really only, one design in this fantastic castle that you've built with the turrets and castellations and all the rest of it. Now, what happens once you've built it? What's going to happen? Well, tide's going to come in, it's going to rain, the wind's going to blow. Not be long before your castle starts to disintegrate, and therefore you're going to have to keep rebuilding it and maintaining it. Whereas the natural order of things with sand is what? It's the sand dune. Now, these are infinitely complex. There's an almost infinite number of ways that a sand dune can be organised, and it's still a sand dune. There's only one way you can organise a castle. Sandcastle is very high order, only one way you can do it, no complexity, because there is only one. Whereas a sand dune's infinitely complex, very little order, and that's it. Now, I like thinking about organisations that way. We build fabulous sandcastles, functions and silos and departments all over the place. And the first thing that we do, and the first learning that you tend to see when you take leaders and teams through it is, well, let's just map that. And then, remember, we're taking this from a customer's perspective. What does that look like to the customer? Now, what it looks like to the customer is exactly what I've been experiencing yesterday and today when I try to deal with an organisation passed from pillar to post. Because, and you need to speak to this department. Well, can you not sort it out? No. And so you start to see how stupid a lot of our design is from a customer perspective. And that's very liberating, because then you can say, right, okay, how would we design it so that one person can do it? Now, I did it when I was an operations director. I went in, it was already a systems thinking organisation. I was responsible for an operations department that had 8 different teams in it. I said, well, that doesn't really make much sense to me. Could we get that down? Could we get it to 1? And it was, people's brains would explode. The human brain could not handle that sort of complexity. But we got it down to 3. And that's what I've done in lots of organizations since, is strip out all of this order that is built. Because really what you want is an organization that is as flexible as a sand pile. Just as the environment changes, no problem. Well, we move with it. And John said, and uses the phrase, which I always remember, because the first thing that will happen at the end of a presentation for study is our experiment. It's right, well, we need to capture that now. We need these new policies. We need another design document. We need that. And John said, well, no. If you codify, you ossify. He said, because as soon as you've written it, as soon as you've chiseled it into stone on the wall, it's going to be out of date.
What have been some of the biggest lessons learned so far in your career?
Shut up. My temptation is to jump in. And if you want to be effective as a coach, that's the worst thing you can do. And active listening. I got some fantastic coaching when I was on the start of my career about the ability to actively listen, not just sort of shut up and look at somebody, but try and get underneath what they're saying, why they're saying it, where that might be coming from. The other thing I have learned, and I now badger all the people I work with about, is not solutionizing. Easiest thing in the world is to look at something. I know what you need to do to fix that. I never do. As we get into working with a team and leaders and study, that's the first thing that they will start to do. First time they see something that doesn't look right. Oh, well, we could do this. And say, no, we're not going to solutionize. You're not allowed to do that. Yeah, I learned a lot about listening, about not jumping to conclusions and solutionizing. But also, I think the biggest lesson is learning when to say no. And that's difficult when you're an internal consultant. As an external, I guess you're difficult because you're turning down money, but you can walk away and say, no, you're not serious about this, or you're not committed. It's more difficult if you're on the payroll, but you still have to be able to do it and say, no, this methodology works, but only on certain conditions.
Where are you investing your time in terms of your own learning and development now? What's sparking your interest?
Following the PhD, I was asked if I wanted to write a book on it, which I did. I was obviously not a bestseller because I'm still working, but it was an academic text, and I've then contributed to another text. My interest is following up on some of the themes that I explored, because as soon as you've written a PhD, the next week you think, oh my God, I've missed this, or I could have been doing that. So I'm just following up on the sense-making elements of things.
And then last question, what advice would you give somebody who is interested in kind of moving into kind of a systems thinking field or this type of work?
There's two things. First of all, is try and get a bit of experience. I don't think it's something that you can do without having had a go at doing some of this yourself. How can you take others through reflective practice if you haven't done it? Now, that doesn't mean you have to spend 20 years working your way up in the business or whatever, but I'm working with a team that we've got apprentices, and we've got people that have come through who've worked on a team that's gone through a cycle and helped pull other people in, and they've loved it, and they've moved into helping with systems thinking because they know what it's like, they know what to do. So that's the first thing, get a bit of experience. I suppose the other thing is, it depends what you want to do. I mean, organisational development is a very wide field. So what really grabs your interest, and make sure that it does, because I went down a couple of rabbit holes. I'll do this, and I thought, oh my God, I hate this. This is not what I want at all. And the third thing is, especially if you are going in for the sort of the coaching or consulting, is don't go in for it if you want the glory, because if you're any good as a coach or a consultant, you'll get very little thanks for it, and quite rightly so. Because at the end of the day, the team produced the results. They should be very proud of that. There's no point in me saying, but it was me.
Well, thank you so much, Ron. I've really it's just there's so many interesting takeaways from this. We're only allowed 3 each, but I just some sidebar ones. You get the trade union you deserve, which is I'm going to go tell some clients that one. There's some really lovely takeaways from here. So I really like the thing about, is it woo-wee?
Yeah.
Woo-wee, which is like non-action and how you go about practicing it. And you said that all leaders are a product of the system, and in terms of how leaders become what they become as well. And you also talked about the dangers of solutionizing and how seductive it is, and not jumping to conclusion. And that is a discipline and a skill in itself, isn't it? Because everything about group process or individual critical thinking leads us to that as well. So those are brilliant. What about you, Danny?
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of those, but different ones for me. So a reminder that organisations aren't closed systems. I think it's easy to forget, so that felt really important. That change, transformation, HR shouldn't be standalone things. They need to be in there, part of the system. The reminder, have you got the time not to do it? So if we're thinking this is going to take too much time, I don't have time to do it, really challenge people. Have you got the time not to do it? And lastly, I love the bit about admiring. Don't admire the problem. Don't spend your time admiring the problem. Spend your time admiring or thinking about the opportunities, because it is really, really tempting, isn't it, to sit back and go, oh, look at this. This is awful. Look at the problem we've got. So
but then what?
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your expertise and all these wonderful lessons that you've learned along the way as well. If people want to follow your work, or if they'd like to connect with you, what's the best way for people to do that?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect up with people on LinkedIn. I'm happy for them to have my email if anybody wants to have an offline chat. Happy to do that.
We will also add a link to your book as well to bring that retirement a little bit sooner.
Yes, an absolute snip at £120.
It is a good read, though. Enjoyed it. But thank you so much, Ron. Really appreciate it. Ron's interview joins the brilliant collection of other interviews that we've got with other practitioners and leader thinkers in their field as well. So we're building a really brilliant range up. So as we said, these interviews come out every week. So they should come out every Monday at 7:30 in the morning, and the audio version comes out every Friday at 12 o'clock. Danny, is that right?
About 12, yeah.
About 12. But if you subscribe to our Buzzsprout channel or our YouTube channel, they'll be notified when every new video or podcast is launched as well. So thank you again, Ron, for your time. We've really enjoyed it. We hope everyone who's been tuning in today has enjoyed it.
Thank you.